been doing Breakfast with Benefits for a long, long time now, and we love to bring in a speaker on a topic that we know impacts our nonprofit community. And today we have Jonathan from DaneNet, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. Numbers for nonprofits. We help nonprofits manage money with mission. So if you are needing day-to-day accounting services, help with your month-end close, maybe you're looking to do an audit for the first time, we can help you prepare for that, and or we can help you with annual budgeting as well. So a couple of the things that we do really well, we work with over 150 different nonprofits. We're a team of 33 as of mid-March with a new hire coming on board, and we also have 3 dedicated subcontractors as well. So growing team, growing influence in the nonprofit community, and we enjoy what we do here. With that, just a quick reminder also, we have our last session of the Breakfast with Benefits series. May 13th, we'll have Deborah Biddle from the People Company Consulting Group speaking in Navigating the Future of Workplace Inclusion. So that will be on May 13th, and then we'll be looking for speakers for our next series. We do a kind of a fiscal year series and every other month. We take the summer off because we know you all need to take some time to yourselves. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jonathan here and let him introduce himself, and we'll be talking all things technology. Please interact with us. Please raise your hands virtually, put items in the chat. Myself or Ella or Becca will check in and make sure that Jonathan sees those things. And yeah, it's best if we have interaction here. It'll and share your stories and thoughts. Take it away, Jonathan.
All right. Well, I think I had a bit of a bio in the ad or the publicity for this event, but I'll mention I'm Jonathan Wenger. I work for DaneNet, and I was actually having a discussion with a colleague recently trying to figure out how long we've been in IT, and that occurred to me, I think it was back in 1992, the first time the nonprofit I was working for, somebody had to figure out how to make the little database work, and I was the one that read the instructions, and one thing led to another, and now I do this full time. So let me get my PowerPoint working here, and we will launch into it. Okay. There we go. So, as I said, I work with DaneNet. We have been around in Dane County for, boy, I don't even want to say how many years, a long time, and been working with supporting nonprofits in technology for, I would say, about 25 years. So we do IT support for nonprofits. We also work with digital equity. We have a refurbished laptop program, and we distribute laptops through partnerships with local nonprofits to low-income people. We also host computer classes, and we partner with places like the public library to do walk-in clinics where people can bring their devices for technical help. But that's not what you were here to talk about. Before actually, though, I get into it, I have a few caveats. First of all, when we talking about comparing Microsoft 365 with Google Workspace, this is not going to be an exhaustive overview, as you might assume. This is really going to be the things that I thought of when I considered each piece of those services, the ones that I thought were important. It may not be what you think are important, so start queuing up the things that I didn't cover and let me know at the end. The second thing I should mention is I'm a technician, not a teacher. So if you find this presentation wanting from a pedagogical perspective, that's because I spend most of my time fixing computer things for people and setting things up and not necessarily explaining them. Also, I'm generally not a power user, which you might find surprising if I'm a techie, but I don't usually go for the latest and greatest, tech tools and gadgets and tweaks. So odds are, if you are a power user of, say, Excel or something, you may know more about Excel than I do. Um, but having said that, I can usually figure things out quickly. So if you have questions, if I don't know it, I can generally find out. So let's see. Moving on. So Microsoft 365 versus Google Workspace. So first off, the similarities. In general, both of these, I'll call them ecosystems, are going to have the same basic tool set. They're both going to have email. They both have a way to create and edit documents. They both allow you to store files in the cloud and sync those files to your desktop. They both allow you to share files, either within your organization or outside to people from other organizations. Um, and they also allow you to create users within your corporate account and assign those accounts to different people in your organization, and then change passwords, and control to some extent, to various extents, the files and other resources that people create within those accounts. Um, and also, both of these ecosystems allow you to use them to log into your Windows computer. So you can use either Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace accounts to log into Windows, which makes it easier to keep track, to manage your Windows users. If you're familiar with the old on-premise Microsoft Active Directory, the server-based thing where you join your workstations to the local Active Directory, and then you'd set up your accounts, and everybody could log into all the workstations. You can do something similar to that with either Workspace or 365. So differences. So the primary differences I would highlight would be um, Google Workspace tends to be more web focused. There aren't Google apps, well, apps that you would run on your computer. Everything happens through the browser. In contrast, Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365 has the whole Microsoft Office suite that is integrated with the online versions of, say, Excel, Word, or PowerPoint that are available through the browser. So also that then relates to look and feel. Google Workspace, of course, uses kind of the Google, excuse me, Gmail, Google Apps, look and feel. It has, and if you like that kind of, um, if you like doing your work in that environment, then it works really well. In contrast, Microsoft Office has more of the, Microsoft Office look and feel. So if you prefer working if you're used to Microsoft Office if you're used to that set of tools, then going those, okay, sorry. I'm losing my train of thought because it's very odd to be looking at my PowerPoint and not looking at people. Okay, so in any case, I think one of the biggest issues in choosing one or the other, and this will come up later in the presentation, is just kind of what people are used to. So if you have employees who are very familiar with Gmail and are really comfortable working in that environment, then that's going to be more appealing. If you have a lot of employees who have been using Microsoft Office on the desktop for years and years and years, then when you go into 365 and open Outlook on the web and it looks exactly like Outlook on your desktop, well, that works very well too. So so that's a big thing to consider. And then lastly, in terms of difference, is administration. So the way I look at it is this: since Google Workspace was kind of built out of um, Gmail. I mean, Gmail was kind of the original, and Gmail and Google Apps were kind of the original things. Um, it tends to have kind of a user-focused um, aspect. So, in contrast, Microsoft Office sort of came out of the server-based Windows domain model. And so it tends to be more organizationally focused. And where that really comes out is, for example, if you have a user that leaves your organization and they run off without giving you their password, and more importantly, without giving you access to their multi-factor authentication um, credentials, in Microsoft 365, it is super easy to go in there and just change the phone number for their multi-factor authentication, delete the other MFA options that they have, change their password, log right into their account. With Google Workspace, you don't have quite that level of control. I mean, ultimately you can get in, but you have to disable that sort of login. You have 10 minutes where you can log into the account, and it's you just can't quite go in and just change things. By the same token, in Microsoft 365, as an administrator, you can very easily go into someone's account, click on a little link, and say, show me all their personal files. In Google Workspace, you just flat out can't do that. You would have to um, ask them to share it with you or completely take over their account, excuse me, log in as them and get access. So again, functionally, it kind of works the same way, but um, as far as, having the same types of tools, but the approach to them and what the experience is to administer them is quite a bit different. All right. Taking a little bit too much time here, so I'm going to try to move along. So here are some of the services I was going to go through in this presentation. Email, file storage and security, file editing. You can read the rest. So let's go to email. So I kind of organized this in a few categories. One is format. We already talked about the fact that Gmail tends to be web-based. Um, Outlook or Outlook on the web, you have either a web or app, and they have made them actually look very, very similar. Encryption. In most cases, most people don't need end-to-end encryption, where when you compose an email, you encrypt it, you send it, the recipient decrypts it. But occasionally, I know some organizations we work with where they're working with the county or some other entities that are requiring them to use end-to-end encryption with their email. In the case of Gmail, there's something called confidential mode, which is kind of encryption, but it's not completely straightforward. I don't know who here has used it, but basically, um, you can set up a message to expire after a certain period of time. And it also becomes encrypted. I mean, the drawback is if you don't want it to expire, but you want it to be encrypted, then you can't choose to do it that way. In the case of Outlook, they have something, well, they had something called Outlook message encryption, which is being deprecated. Um, and is being replaced now by something called Purview. As far as I know, OME still works. Well, if only because I know of a couple of organizations that are using it, and no one has complained to me yet that it has not that it stopped working. But that's more your kind of straightforward. You click the button that says encrypt, and the message is encrypted. If the other person at the other end is using Microsoft 365, then it's transparent. They just open the message. If not, then they get a link. You've probably seen those kinds of things where they have to go somewhere and type something in to view the message. Um, as far as organization, Gmail uses labels. Um, so it kind of looks like you have folders in Gmail, but they're not actually folders. Each message is labeled with certain, well, in different ways that get displayed as folders. Um, but the difference is you can have multiple labels, whereas in the case of Outlook, it has traditional folders and also categories, which are kind of like labels, but it just functions a little bit differently. Message reporting. In the case of Gmail, if a message you don't want comes in, you can label it spam. In the case of Outlook, you have the option of labeling it either junk, which is kind of like spam, or as phishing. Offline backups. If you want to take your old email and download it and stick it on your hard drive, Google has something called Google Takeout, which is the way you can download all of your Google resources. Outlook, since it was built out of the desktop version of Outlook, has what's called a PST file. That's the Outlook email data format. So especially for mail migrations, it can be really handy to just save your entire mailbox as one of these PST files, which then lets you import. You can import or export as a PST file and stick it in your hard drive, and the folder structure and all the data in your mailbox is presented in exactly the same way as it was online. Data privacy. So Gmail, and I think this kind of gets back to the way, sort of where Google Workspace was built from. If you look at least the last time I looked at Google's privacy, what do you call them, documentation, they basically say, if you put stuff on our service, the stuff that we put there, you put there, it's yours, but we can also kind of look at it. In the case of Microsoft 365, again, the last time I checked their privacy settings, oh shucks, there's a typo there. Sorry about that. That's supposed to say more privacy. Microsoft 365 says, you put your data on our servers, it's your data, we're going to encrypt it, we're not going to look at it, and only you have access to it. Again, things could have been updated since the last time I looked, but that's what I saw the last time I compared those. So file storage. So Google Drive, this is a screenshot of my Google Drive. And so the way Google does file storage is you have your personal drive, which contains your personal files, and then there's Google Shared Drives, which you can see there on the left. And Google Shared Drives are actually fairly simple to manage. To add one, you would click the New button at the top, say New Shared Drive, you give it a name, you put in who you want to have access to it, and then you have a drive that's shared with whoever you've designated in your organization or outside your organization, and that's it. If you have an existing shared drive and you want to give access to somebody else, you would just right-click on the shared drive, say share, and then here's an example of the window that would pop up. And as you can see, you can add more people with access, or you can click copy link to get a link directly to that file. Say if you want to share a file with somebody, outside your organization, and you just want to share that file and have them go straight to it. Now, in Microsoft OneDrive is the place that you store your personal files. So that's comparable to Google Drive, and it's very, very similar. As I said, you can, in both cases, the files will sync to your desktop. You can access them in Windows Explorer if you're in Windows. The big difference is in the Microsoft ecosystem, your shared files go into something called SharePoint. Now, SharePoint is Microsoft's online portal platform. And SharePoint is it's a little like having a giant Swiss Army knife. SharePoint can do all kinds of really nifty things. You can store documents there. You can have lists, which are kind of like a little bit like a Excel spreadsheet that you can even do like database functions on. You can embed calendars in SharePoint. You see there on the left in this picture, there's Notebook. You can have a main page with a news feed. SharePoint sites are kind of designed to be sort of the first place you'd stop if you have a team of people working together, either the whole organization or like a subgroup that's working on a specific project. And it's designed so that you can aggregate all the information that you would need for your team in one spot. Having said that, almost everybody that I work with just uses SharePoint to store documents. Because if you want to have shared documents in Microsoft 365, you got to share them, you got to store them in SharePoint. So in this case, we have this team site, and there's the one option on the left, documents, and here's all the documents in there. And you can manage access to these documents kind of similarly to Google shared folders. But since it's in a different portal, it's not quite as easy and straightforward. So in this case, you can see I clicked on manage, excuse me, manage access for a particular folder. And here it's telling me that one person has access, which is me, because I just created this to try it out for testing purposes. If I would click on the groups link, it would tell me what groups have access. And then if I clicked on the links portion, it would tell me if anyone has created any sharing links. Like a sharing link would be, see, this is where it gets complicated. There's the file and folder permissions, which are kind of comparable to the file and folder permissions you would have in Windows. But you can also create these sharing links, which have their own separate permissions that provide direct access to the file or folder. So that's kind of like what I described in Google shared folders, except that in Google, it's all one set of permissions. There's not really any difference between a sharing link permissions or the actual under regular folder permissions. So all that to say, they both work perfectly fine. It's just a little more complicated to manage permissions in SharePoint. And I should also mention, I'm going to back up here for a second. You'll notice that on the OneDrive page, down at the very bottom, where you see it says quick access, it's possible if you quote unquote, follow a SharePoint site, it will show up in your OneDrive. So if you're working from the web portal, you can access SharePoint shared stuff in OneDrive. Although, having said that, most people just access all this stuff from their desktop from File Explorer. Okay, so file editing and collaboration. So as you probably know, in Google Workspace, you have Google Apps, which allows you to edit documents and spreadsheets and whatnot. And it can edit both Microsoft and Google documents. In the case of Office Online, so Microsoft 365, you can also edit Word and Excel docs in a web browser. But then you also have the option of editing it in the desktop version of these same apps. Real-time collaboration, it does work with both. In Google Apps, you can two people can be editing a document at the same time, and you see the cursor jumping around when other people are doing things. Same thing with the Microsoft ecosystem, and actually, it is possible to have that same thing happen with the desktop versions of Microsoft Office as well. Features. Um, I say here that Google Workspace has less features than Microsoft, especially the desktop apps. Maybe not so much the online version, have more. However, that's maybe not entirely fair because I would say Google Workspace has the Google Docs has plenty of features. Um, you occasionally hear people complaining that it's missing this or that, but it's usually amongst the more esoteric options that, I'm not sure how many people actually use. I think this probably has something to do with how these two um, sets of applications came to be, because Microsoft Office has been around since what, I don't know, 1989 or something like that. Um, and every time they come out with the new version of Microsoft Office, if they don't add features, then there's no reason for people to buy it. And so they've been cramming features into Microsoft Office for a long time. Google Apps, on the other hand, has not been around quite as long, and I don't know that they're not coming out with, new versions that they need to sell. So they have less incentive to keep packing in, stuff that it can do. And then file types, as I said, both of these environments can edit Microsoft Office files, although Microsoft Office can't really open Google Docs files because Google Docs files are not actually stored on your hard drive ever. They're stored in um, Google Docs. Okay. Now I'm wondering, would it be a good idea to pause for questions, or should I just plow on through?
Any questions out there so far? Okay. Yeah,
All
let's keep
right.
plowing. Thanks,
All
Chuck.
right, let's go. So, video meetings. So, both Google and Microsoft ecosystems contain a video meeting app. We are actually using Microsoft Teams as we speak. Um, so, however, well, I guess I should back up. So, in both cases, and my guess is you have all been in meetings using either one, they all have the same basic features. When you have a meeting, you can share your screen, um, virtual backgrounds, and all that kind of thing. The difference is in some of the add-on things. So Google Meet, you can make video meetings and calls, um, and it's integrated with Google Calendar so that when you create a calendar event, you can add a Google Meet meeting. In fact, it does it automatically for you in a lot of cases. But that's about it. That's the package. Microsoft Teams, as maybe similar to some of their other applications, has way more stuff. So Microsoft has set up Teams to not just be video meetings, but also chat. So in a sense, not video, Microsoft Teams is kind of set up to be a competitor to Slack if you've used Slack, so that the idea is that you have an environment where you can have it open all the time, and when you want to talk to your coworkers, either through a chat or through video meetings, um, it's kind of always there. to facilitate that communication. It's also integrated with Outlook Calendar. So, you create a meeting, you can easily add a video meeting to it. But the other thing with Teams is Microsoft has also crammed in, or maybe just use that toolkit to include their phone service. So Google also has Google Phone, but that's a separate application. But in the Microsoft ecosystem, their like telephone service is part of Microsoft Teams. So it can get a little bit confusing sometimes. It's like, what is Teams? Is it a video meeting or is it like a, plain old telephone network um, phone call? Well, it's actually will do both. Okay, identity services. So here is something that can be kind of confusing with Microsoft 365, and that is how. So actually, I back up. When I talk about identity services, I'm talking about the way each of these services manages your accounts. And so when you log into a Microsoft 365 application, say you're going to log into Outlook Online, your actual authentication, where your password is stored, and the way that Microsoft checks your account and your password and lets you in is through something called Entra ID. So in this diagram here, I tried to kind of lay out the way this functions. So basically, Entra ID is the central location where all of the account information for Microsoft's ecosystem is stored. So when you log into 365, you are actually authenticating to Entra ID. When you log into Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud platform for storing servers or other things, you also are authenticated through Entra ID. And the last piece, which I'd referred to earlier, if you want to connect your local workstations, like say your Windows computers, to Microsoft 365, you join them, is the term you would use, to Entra ID. So you set up a software connection with that particular Windows computer so that when someone goes to the login screen, they have the option of typing in their Microsoft 365 or Entra ID credentials, their email address and password, and that logs them into Windows. And also then, since they're already logged into Microsoft 365, it makes it easier for them to access a lot of these online services because when they open up one of those things, Windows will pass along the fact that they're already logged in and not require them to log in a second time. So that's Entra ID. So when you hear Entra ID used to be called Azure AD. So if you hear somebody talking about Azure AD, it's the same thing as Entra ID. I'm not quite sure why they decided to change it. Maybe to keep it more separate from Azure being the cloud platform. So in Google's case, it's a little bit more integrated. Google has basically it's all pretty much Google Workspace. So it's not set up as an identity provider like Entra ID with the things separate from it. When you log into Google Workspace, you're just logging into Google Workspace. However, Google also, and well, although I guess I should say Google Workspace, as you see here, Google has its own cloud environment, and Google Workspace provides the authentication for that as well. So if you're logging in, if you're going to set up a server in Google's cloud, you would authenticate to that service through Google Workspace. Um, Google has its own way for you to log into Windows. It's called Credential Provider for Windows. Unlike Microsoft, because Google didn't sell you the operating system, it's not built into Windows like Entra ID would be. However, it's a fairly simple install of the little application. And once you do, very similar to how you can log into Windows with your Entra ID or email credentials, you can set things up so when someone turns their computer on, they get a login screen, they type in their Google Workspace credentials, and pop there right into Windows. And either one of these can be very useful in keeping in managing your users, because instead of having to have a separate login for somebody on their own computer or on each computer, you can just set up one account for each person that they can use to log into any organization computers that are connected in this way. All right, multi-factor authentication. This is something, if you are not currently requiring everyone in your organization to use multi-factor authentication, or in the Google environment, it's called two-step verification. If you are not, the first thing I would strongly recommend you do after you get off of this call is send out an email saying that you are now requiring it for all users. MFA is the most it's the most effective way to prevent your user's account from being compromised. Now, it's not a panacea. There are very common now ways for attackers to get past the multi-factor authentication. But having said that, it makes a huge, huge difference. And, in most cases, if somebody's account is compromised, it's going to be because they did not have this turned on. So, having said all that, Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace do MFA a little bit differently. So in Microsoft 365's case, if you turn on the requirement for everyone to have multi-factor authentication, the next time one of those users logs in, they will get a prompt saying, your organization requires you to have MFA. Here are your options for setting this up. And it will prompt them to do it, and maybe give them a few days of grace period if they don't want to do it right away, but ultimately they won't be able to log in until they turn it on. In the case of Google Workspace, if you turn on enforcement for two-step verification, and that user does not turn it on before enforcement is engaged, they won't be able to log in at all. It'll just say, sorry, you don't have it set up, and it won't log them in. Personally, I prefer the 365 option, because what usually happens when you start requiring two-step verification in the Google environment is you tell people you have 2 weeks to set up multi-factor authentication, and it all has to be done before whatever this date. And I will guarantee you, in pretty much every case, when that day comes around, at least 1 or 2 people are going to call you up and say, I can't log in. And then you'll have to turn off enforcement, allow them to set it up, and then turn it back on again. But, having said that, both ways work. Okay, collaborative inbox versus Microsoft 365 shared mailbox. So there often come times when you have an account like, say, info at your organization that more than one person needs to have access to. Both Google and Microsoft have options for this, but they function a little bit differently. So in the case of Google's option is called the collaborative inbox. And these are actually a type of Google group. Google groups being um, like discussion lists or mailing lists. So it's kind of like a souped up mailing list. And what you do is you create one, you add members to it, and then all those members are able to view the messages that come into that group. And if you want to, you can forward incoming messages to all of the members, or you can have them just stay in that list or in that Google group. Um, if you're a member of one of these groups, you get to it by going to Google Groups, so groups.google.com, and then you would look at your groups, and this is one of them, and you can see the messages in it. Um, these also support aliases, so if you want your mailbox to be called info, but also to be called, something else, like, I don't know, information, um, the mail that group can have multiple names to the same thing. In the case of the Microsoft environment, what they do, they call these their shared mailboxes, and this is actually a, a mailbox. It's not a group. So it's like the inbox that you would have for a regular user account, except that it's designed to be shared and it doesn't have access to the other Microsoft services. It's just a mailbox. Um, also, similar to the Google environment, you can forward incoming emails to the members of the group. Um, but I'd say the biggest difference is that in the case of shared mailboxes, it's managed from Outlook or Web Outlook. So you would see the shared mailboxes you're members of, you would see them alongside the rest of your email, as opposed to having to go to another location to see it. And with shared mailboxes, you can also create aliases. Ooh, I need to zoom through this. Fortunately, we're almost done. Um, Actually, so administration. I think I already talked a bit about the differences in the way that Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace are administered. Um, the fact that Microsoft is kind of this is my framing, but Microsoft is sort of starting with a more organizational view, or is starting from the organization and then looking at individual accounts as part of the organization. Google Workspace is more starting with individual accounts and then building those out into the organization, if that makes sense. And that has impacts on the way you can administer accounts and the level of access that an administrator has to manage accounts and to access user resources. Okay, that's what I have for a PowerPoint. Now,
Yeah. I've got to believe that there are people who are having current issues with either Google or Microsoft. So please, if you've got a question, or you can pretend that, you've got a friend who has having an issue with their computer. But, like I know, for instance, one of the issues that we run into is we'll get a shared folder sent to us from a Google environment. And then, how do you like easily access that without having to, in my case, I'm probably old dog here and Ella will probably roll her eyes, but, um, I always end up going back to the original email to find that open folder email. And, I think you can maybe bookmark it in your preferred browser, but then you still have safety features or whatever, like sharing folders in Google environments with people outside of your environment. Is there any tips or tricks on that you or anybody on the call have found to be useful?
well, I mean, I would say the answer to that question is going to depend a lot on how you need to use it. Like in a lot of cases, somebody shares a file with you, like you said, you get a link, and if you only need to look at that file once, or if you just need to be able to download that file to your desktop, I mean, the simplest thing is just to follow the link, get the file, download it, do what you need to do, and then you're done. Um, However, in the Google environment, you've probably noticed there's a shared with me link on the Google Drive page. And if you look there, usually that'll show you everything that somebody shared with you, going back through history. So probably the simplest way for, if you just think, oh, shucks, what was that? I want to look at it again, would be to go to that link and look it up and just download it again. Now, if it's something that you regularly have to collaborate on, then, well, actually, that still probably would be the best way. I think, this is where it comes out where I'm not a power user. But I think there's a way to create a shortcut that would pin that
Yeah,
stuff and
I
make
could
it
think
easier to
of
get.
like in our world, like the annual budgeting process where maybe you have a shared document and people are putting inputs into it and just having to go back. We're on our end, we're a Microsoft company, and so I find it challenging at times to easily be able to go into a shared Google budget for a client and feel like we're on the same page, if you will. But
Hmm.
I'm guessing that's a little bit of a old dog thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shared with me dialogue is gonna be where you want to find stuff. But I realize, a lot of people are sharing stuff with you, then it gets to be a lot. Um, However, I'm just looking. You can, if you look in the shared with me um, folder, it's not a folder, but um, and then hover over the particular file or folder, you have the option to add to starred. And if you star it, then that's going to make it easier for it to come up, if that makes sense. Then you can go like on the left, there's an option you can click starred, and then it'll show you all the stuff that you've highlighted.
That's probably
And sorry, I guess I could have
oh
shared and demoed that, but shall I do that? Or does anybody
yeah,
care?
that's a decent recommendation, the starring feature.
Okay.
Anybody
Well,
have any shared successes with implementation of either Google or Microsoft share points situations? I know for our own firm, we had a heck of a migration from Dropbox into SharePoint, and that was a lot to work through. And on the other side of it, we still see a few issues here and there. But ultimately, it's nice to have us all in one collaborative environment. And Ella and our outsourced IT team have been able to, get us to where we need to be for the most part. I think we would still love to have a few of the kinks worked out, but um, you know, technology is tough.
hmm well, and I guess I could well, but before I start rambling on, just make sure there's nobody. I see something in the chat. What's
Yeah, sending invites for meetings to external individuals, any differences to be aware of? That's a good one.
um not that I know of. Um, I mean, one obvious thing is going to be if you're sending the message to someone whose email account is in the same ecosystem, it works a little more smoothly. But having said that, yeah, I don't. I mean, in both cases, like I was saying, you can attach your video meeting links, and everything's right there, and people are going to get all that information. So yeah, I don't I w again with the caveat saying that I'm not a power user, I don't know of any significant differences. And I guess what I was going to say, if there aren't, if you think of other things, stick them in the chat and I can respond to them. When you're talking about migrations, that does bring to mind there are some differences there as well. I mean, a lot of what I do in these environments is help people with migrating, often from, say, an on-premise server into Google Workspace or Microsoft 365. Occasionally, we're migrating from Microsoft 365 to Google Workspace or vice versa. Also, sometimes, like you guys from Dropbox. Um, One thing I would say, and this isn't well, in general, if any of you have not, chosen one of these, they both Microsoft and Google provide these services for free for nonprofits. So there's not much reason to go one way or the other in terms of price. It's really becomes an issue of where your users are the most comfortable. Um, However, I will say Microsoft's migration tools are quite a bit nicer. If you are migrating files from an on-premise server, like file server, into Microsoft 365 or into SharePoint, they have what that says SharePoint migration tool. You install a little piece on your server. It looks at your files. It tells you what they are. You can have it copy all the files to 365 and to sort of stage your migration. And then you can wait a few weeks, do it again. It'll just copy the files that have changed. It keeps track of, whichever ones fail, which ones don't. It's really nice. In the case of Google Workspace, if you're going to do the same migration, there is a tool that costs extra that I have never used. So usually what we end up doing is installing um, the Google Drive app on the file server and then just copying the files up to Google Drive or to the shared folder by just copying them within the Google Drive app. And that generally works. But if you run into issues where there's like file conflicts or troubles with names and whatnot, it's just a lot more complicated to sort it out because you don't have that nice log file with everything with all the errors and things spelled out for you. So, it works in both cases. I like the Microsoft one just because it's easier for me.
Well, not seeing a lot of noise in the chatter, so I think we can thank Jonathan for the time today. Again, on May 13th, we'll be having Deborah Biddle with her presentation. Trying to get that up here one more time. Navigating the future of workplace inclusion. So watch for those invitations for all of you. Jackson Baker with Wisconsin Council of the Blind, you're our $25 Amazon gift card winner for attending today. So watch for that email from Becca on our team, or it might come directly from Amazon. I don't remember, but appreciate the time today, Jonathan. And, I'm sure if you have questions, we can get them funneled to DayNet. DayNet is a client of Numbers for Nonprofits. We've got many mutual clients, and I'm sure we can connect people who might be interested in learning more about DayNet can do for you as an outsourced IT provider. So, all right,
All right.
everybody, have a great day. Take care.